And I believe that it has become much wider than just an economic forum. And here different projects are being presented, and also we discuss opportunities in humanitarian, arts, culture, politics spheres, and so on. This is not the first time we hold such briefings here on the sidelines of the forum. And this time, I believe there's a great coincidence. There are so many anniversaries. This is the 10th forum, and we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of the Great Patriotic War. And also, we should say that this is an important symbol, historical symbol, and lots of events are held under the aegis of this anniversary. We are now in the Far Eastern region. It is so beautiful. This Isle of Ruski, you know, I'm looking straight into the cameras, but on my right there is such a beautiful view of the sea. And this campus of the Far Eastern Federal University, they host this great event, and it has become an international important venue. First, I would like to speak about national and international ties with the Far Eastern District. As you know, 11 constituents of the Russian Federation are included into this district, and right now, in this campus, there are stands of each of those regions, where they show the major achievements. And these are not just pavilions, these are like great facilities, and they speak about great achievements of each of the regions. And the Far Eastern also defines relations with the countries of the Pacific region. And all this brings us to understanding that we are speaking here about the history of the Russian state development and the exploration of the Far East. I'm not going to remind you of this because you need to study it on your own. But I can say that there are so many great examples of great spirit and heroism, which is very useful for patriotic upbringing of younger generations, and it is important for understanding the essence of our country. We see that there are large-scale, long-term projects in the sphere of infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and other projects, and by using the natural resources, the intellectual potential, and other assets of the country. And the development of this region helps and promotes reorientation towards different and new markets. And also we are using the enormous experience and potential. And we are like pioneers in this sphere. We call them Sherpas, and we promote humanitarian and other ties here in the region. And I would like to remind you that the Ministry of Justice, as of the 1st of September this year, has registered over 60 agreements with Pacific and other countries. And it is Mongolia, Belarus, other states as well, and also various administrative and municipal territories from Vietnam, Korean People's Democratic Republic, and others. We also should speak about the following, that the Republic of Buryatia will be chairing the Association of Regional Administration of the Northeast Asian countries. And we believe that the cooperation with this multifaceted cooperation is based on neighborly ties, equality, and also on principles which are common for the whole macro-Asian region. And this can be actively used for our joint initiatives. In addition to this, in Yakutsk, there's Secretariat of the Northern Forum. This organization was established in 1991, and we believe that this structure might be interesting for interregional cooperation with non-Arctic states of the Global South, states which are interested in joint exploration and development of northern areas. And this year, during this Far Eastern Forum, here in Vladivostok, all 11 Far Eastern regions of Russia traditionally present their regions, and you can see it in the so-called street of the Far East. Yesterday I visited for the second time, and I strongly recommend you all visit it. And you can also register through the website of Roscongress, and it is so warm outside. You all can go and see all those pavilions. And now let's begin with the Minister Lavrov meetings. On the 11th of September, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, who is going to take part in the 11th strategic dialogue with the Gulf cooperation states. This will take place at the level of foreign ministers. The previous meeting took place in September 2024 in Riyadh, and the central event will be the plenary session, and we are going to discuss a wide range of international and regional agenda issues, and also we are going to discuss the whole range of cooperation aspects in the sphere of foreign trade, humanitarian and investment, and cultural elements. And after this strategic meeting, there will be a press conference of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, and Kuwait, who is the current chair of the Council and the acting General Secretary of this organization. So we are inviting you all to take part in it. I can already announce that it will be possible to apply for accreditation to this event. This is for the media. You can find the link in the textual version of this briefing after it's ends. So come and take part in it.
And according to the tradition, on the sidelines of the event, some bilateral meetings of Minister Lavrov will take place with his Arabian colleagues. And should you have some questions? We will definitely somewhat later announce the schedule of bilateral meetings, and we'll provide all the materials. You'll get all the additional information. Now, the other event that will become a major international event is on the 9th of September. The 80th session of the General Assembly will be inaugurated. The high-level Russian delegation will take part in this. So the event will happen between 23rd and 29th of September. The Russian delegation will be headed by Minister Lavrov, and this upcoming session will happen against the backdrop of increased turbulence in the global arena. I think this is due to the spread of conflicts and deepening of the crises in economy, and primarily this is due to the desire of the collective West to maintain its slipping dominance in the global arena using illegitimate and dirty tricks. And these include illegitimate sanctions, restrictions on access to new technologies, sucking up of resources, and sometimes this even degenerates into direct military interventions. The process of establishing a more democratic world order, as on many occasions we mentioned, is a fact of life. It's an objective development. I think this is obvious. And it's impossible to reverse this process. And this is due to the shift of the center of gravity toward Asia. I think it's quite obvious that, while being here in Vladivostok, in Africa, in Latin America, we observe the advent of new pillars of social, cultural, economic influence, and the desire to contribute more to the solutions of global challenges. The agenda of the newly established centers is constructive. Nobody claims that they are exclusive, and nobody is saying that, very soon they're going to be the only ones, the most important ones in this world. Yet they all tend to emphasize the unique nature of each other and not their own nature. And look at the agenda that the Westerners come up with every day, literally every day. We see an avalanche of statements. Some of them we'll discuss in more detail today. The avalanche of aggressive, destructive statements that are permeated with hatred and some phobias based on national, racial, religious grounds. In the course of the 80th session of the General Assembly, taking the above-mentioned facts, the Russian delegation will concentrate on strengthening the basis of fair multipolarity and coordinating role of the UN as the core mechanism to regulate the global policy and addressing global challenges, addressing the settlement in Ukraine, opposing the colonial practices of the West. Together with the partners of the global majority, we are keen to decisively go for the rule of law and the Charter of the UN in its entirety. Given the 80th anniversary, a lot of attention during this session will be devoted to the critical analysis of the performance and achievements of the United Nations. And by the achievements, we mean a whole set of those achievements, of positive and negative outcomes. The global organization has become one of the key achievements of the global community, epitome of the desire of humankind to set up an effective mechanism to ensure lasting peace, human rights, and socioeconomic developments. Now, what about the UN track record? There are many achievements in terms of settling international conflicts, strengthening the arms control system, disarmament, non-proliferation, fighting poverty and hunger. Peace-making operations of the UN are to be praised. Our country has contributed dramatically to the establishment of the global organization. To a large extent, the Soviet proposals laid down the foundation for the UN modalities, and Russia consistently considers this global organization as the one having the central coordinating role. This is the only intergovernmental structure that is able to ensure a painless transition to multipolarity. However, we have to recognize that the UN today is living through difficult times, to put it mildly. Increasingly, we hear that UN is facing challenges, is unable to pursue the tasks set forth by its mandate. While this criticism is well-grounded to some extent, however, the root causes of the current problems, the challenges, are not due to the inefficiencies or limitations of the UN or it being obsolete, but rather those are due to persistent desire of the Westerners to make it work according to their rules, the rules that only they know. And whatever they do should not be challenged, and all the rest should bow to the Western interests. Therefore, it's important that all the states should unequivocally confirm their commitments to the goals and principles of the UN Charter. The Westerners are trying to use the provisions of the Charter to their advantage, but, well, there are many components of the charter that have to be followed and implemented in its entirety. This would serve as the true foundation for the restoration of the authority of the UN and the group of friends to protect the UN Charter leads the way in opposing Western messages and building fair polycentricity. Now let's move on to our next regular section on the crisis in Ukraine. I wish I could speak more about settling this situation, but there are some other trends too. Let's start with the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime. The Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to commit acts of terror against the peaceful population of our country. Last week, 110 Russian civilians were hit by enemy drones. 12 people died, 98 were wounded, including 3 minors. More than 2,500 munitions were shot at civilian targets. On the 29th of August, a drone wounded a civilian in Borisovka village. In the Zazula village, a man was hit by a drone in the village of Golovino. 2 individuals were wounded. On the 30th of August, a drone attacked a car and the civilian suffered. In the Smordino village, the drone wounded 2 individuals, including a 3-year-old. In Yasny Zori village, a married couple were hit by a drone. In Belgorod, a drone attacked a multi-story apartment with 2 victims. On the 31st of August, a drone attacked a vehicle and the driver was wounded. In the village of Murom, a civilian was hit. And on September the 1st, the Day of Knowledge, the drones attacked a truck, the car, and a civilian facility in the village of Borisovka with 4 victims. In the Graveron city, an 18-year-old girl were hit by a drone. The Bryansk region, on the 29th of August, the enemy drone attacked a civilian car with 1 victim. After the attack, the car slammed into a house and this triggered a fire. On the 30th of August, the Banderite drone hit a truck on the Suzemka-Strachevo road and the driver was hit. On the same day, in the city of Suzemka, the Banderovites used the kamikaze drones to hit the community center. And in the village of Krapivina, the drone attacked an agricultural enterprise. In the Donetsk People's Republic, on the 29th of August, the Ukrainian drone attacked a living quarter in Makiivka, and the shrapnel wounded 2 elderly ladies. In Zaporozhye region, on the 20th of August, the Ukrainian military shelled the Dnipro-Rudnensky war facility and with 7 victims. And during the attack, there was a concert with the participation of children in the facility that was hit. In the Kursk region, on the 20th of August, the enemy mine, the infamous Lepestok mine, hit Sergei Soldatov, the operator of a national TV channel. On the 29th of August, in the city of Sudzha, the Ukrainian Nazists destroy the monument to the founder of the Russian acting school, Mikhail Shepkin. Well, why Shepkin was in the way? Well, the only explanation is hatred. And, you know, there is this person walking around, you know, being hateful of the entire world, and he would hit anything, a dog, a stone, thus releasing his anger, hitting those who have nothing to do with the nature of this hatred. But this hatred has been in the making for so many years that this anti-lesson drove home. On the same day, in Oktyabrski district, a 26-year-old traffic policeman was hit. On the 30th of August, a drone damaged the power station in Moldova, and 33 settlements with a total population of 8.6 thousand people lost access to electricity. On the 31st of August, a drone attack wounded 4 civilians in the Belaya village. On the 1st of September, near the Popovka village, 2 men aged 38 and 28 died because of a mine hit. In Luhansk People's Republic, on the 1st and 2nd of September, 2 civilians were hit by drones. In Kherson region, on the 29th of August, in the Velike Kopane village, due to artillery shelling, a local resident was wounded. On the 30th of August, the drone attacked a civilian vehicle, and a deputy of the Alyoshkinsky municipal district, Alexei Zogol, was wounded. On the 31st of August, the Ukrainian military shelled the village of Alyoshki, and women died. On the same day, the Ukrainian Nazists deliberately shelled the humanitarian aid post in Alyoshki. On the 1st of September, in the city of Golaya Pristan, an explosion of ammunition wounded a child born in 2013. In the Radensk village and in Alyoshki village, 5 people suffered. According to the Russian military medics, the Ukrainian military uses so-called expansion ammunition, and this kind of ammunition is banned by the international law. Do you think that any Ukrainian ambassador in Rome, Madrid, or Brussels, or elsewhere were summoned on the occasion of using the ammunition banned by international law? Those who are very keen to uphold human rights? No, of course not. And obviously, the crime doesn't go unpunished. The Russian courts continue issuing verdicts to Ukrainian neo-Nazists. A member of the Azov regiment, Artem Filin, received 28 years behind bars, and the Investigative Committee of Russia investigates criminal cases against the Ukrainian military who committed crimes in the Kursk region. And Zelensky keeps talking about security guarantees for Ukraine. On the 29th of August, Zelensky presented his own vision of such guarantees, identifying 3 priority components, the way he sees them. That is, maintain the current strength of the Ukrainian military with secure supply of financial resources and weapons. And mind you, Zelensky himself adjusts the strength of the the Ukrainian military, putting to the front line of those mobilized. He's talking about providing financial and resources and the weapons to the Ukrainian military. These are to be supplied by the Western minority. He also talks about protecting Ukraine by its partners in this NATO light format. I think he's mistaking it for a cocktail. He also mentioned that this would be needed in case there is a new invasion. And finally, he's talking about maintaining the anti-Russian sanctions and the use of the stolen Russian assets, as he put it, to restore his country. Well, as to the third component, given the corruption and deep-rooted desire to steal anything Ukraine, well, nothing will suffice to restore the country. Even the military aid that comes to Ukraine in this critical period gets stolen. Countries that are donors, that support Ukraine, but they're not donating blood that could benefit Ukraine. Rather, they bring in bad blood that is killing Ukraine. Well, those donors cannot force the Ukrainian regime to provide accounts of the resources the regime had received. Well, this would be a never-ending story. All the ideas of this Ukrainian leader who that are, in fact, identical to those voiced by the war party Ukraine are unacceptable, and they aim to maintain Ukraine as a beachhead against our country. Those are not security guarantees for Ukraine. They are guarantees of danger for Europe. It is quite grotesque to speak about the so-called new law. It's a quasi-law of Ukraine on the basics of the national memory of the Ukrainian people. That speaks about the war of independence that was started back in February of 2014. Just think about it. Obviously, in their desire to rewrite the history, the clique on the Bankova Street is trying to distort the history of the country. And they're trying to churn out as many new documents as possible with artificial definitions, but they have documents that were passed 20 or 25 years ago, such as Declaration of National Sovereignty. It was passed on the 16th of July of 1990. The Act on the announcement of independence dated 24th of August of 1991. It's been 30 years, even more. Well, the conclusion is obvious. Ukraine has lost its independence. It is governed from outside and de facto has become a true colony for its Western curators. And there can be no talk about independence at the moment. And not because somebody doesn't want it, but because this is the state the country is in. Since the neo-Nazis in Kiev are ready to sell off the remnants of Ukraine and to sacrifice millions of lives of its residents.
Just for the sake of their own desires and the goals set to them by the Western community. And they keep pumping the Kiev regimes with weapons. And the European sponsors have never stopped doing that. And they proceed doing that with one single objective, to continue the fighting until the very last Ukrainian. On August 29th, the Defense Minister of Belgium, Ter Franken, participated in the unofficial meetings of the heads of the defense ministries of the EU in Copenhagen, where he announced that Belgium is about to deliver the F-16 jet fighters to Ukraine and provide a tranche of military assistance to the amount of 100 million euro. The Defense Secretary of the USA approved the procurement of Patriot by Denmark, an additional defense equipment to $8.5 billion, quote, for defense of the allies in the NATO and its partners, and also approved 2 military contracts for Ukraine to the total amount of $329 million for the air defense systems Patriot, and furthermore adjacent equipment to the amount of $179 million, plus continuation of the Starlink contract to the amount of $150 million. It also became known to us that the State Department has approved a potential deal to sell the Iran missiles to Ukraine and the associated equipment to the amount of $829 million. The Ukrainian party has requested up to 3,350 guided missiles and also the navigation systems to ensure defense from those. And what is the pretense used for that? And I quote, that is to ensure and strengthen the ability of Ukraine to self-defense and ensuring regional security. Well, the obvious question is, how does that relate to Ukraine's statements on desire for peace, diplomatic settlement of the conflict, and minimization of the potential of this conflict. I believe those actions are exactly the opposite to the declared goals. We have been repeatedly stating that any kind of funding of the Kiev regimes would only prolong its agony and is fraught with serious consequences to global stability. Now, just a few words. I have received some questions on that, and therefore I'm going to comment on the plans of the EU to send troops to Ukraine. On August 31st, in an interview to the Financial Times and during the joint conference with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk within the framework of the inspection of the eastern flank, the head of European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, declared that there is a kind of a clear plan available regarding potential sending of troops to the territory of Ukraine to ensure the so-called security guarantees after the ceasefire. According to Madame von der Leyen, this work is underway and is going, and that's a quote, really successfully. Well, that is quite evident, apparently, based on the number of human losses incurred by Ukraine. European Commission is really overperforming. Madame von der Leyen also added that they are to study and analyze new potential sources for financing of the Ukrainian armed forces, and she kept emphasizing that the first defense line is the defense and big army for Ukraine, and the second one is a multinational group of the coalition of the willing with the support of the Americans. So initially it was one kind of a steel porcupine, now we're about to have two apparently. Well, obviously, Madame von der Leyen got carried away with her fantasies, and the Minister of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, jumped in to stop her there, stating that the European Union has no competences whatsoever to allocate troops or take decision on allocation of troops of any of the EU member countries, irrespectively of their purpose. He was clearly irritated by that kind of narrative, and he kept emphasizing that that kind of matters cannot be discussed until the parties of the conflict are seated at the negotiation table. I'd like to further ponder on this revelation, and I'd like to reiterate that Russia has no objective whatsoever to negotiate any kind of a framework that could facilitate foreign intervention in Ukraine in any kind of a format. Well, we do need to convey it to our counterparts so that the next time they're willing to consider this matter, they could get very clear hints regarding the position of Russia. Well, they obviously consider themselves the hegemon of the neo-colonial world order. They keep inciting the war and obviously treat Ukraine as a testing facility for their new military hardware and equipment. And in this context, I'd like to pay attention to the statement made by the professor of organic chemistry at the Cornell University, Dave Collum. That's the statement he made in an interview to Tucker Carlson on August 27th. In this particular interview, Professor mentioned 36 U.S. laboratories in Ukraine used to manufacture biological weapon and test this biological weapon on civilians. And once again, that is the statement made by the professor of organic chemistry from the Cornell University. Testing of biological weapons on humans. And so far, I haven't had the license being revoked from this very professor. He was never fired from the university, and he openly stated that Ukraine is perfectly suitable for that kind of testing, thanks to developed infrastructure and extremely vulnerable population that could be used for testing. Well, that's quite a statement, don't you think? I've also noticed that the Western grants and financing is used by some media who claim to be mainstream media, but actually act as propaganda, calling it fake. Well, sorry, but I just quoted professor of the Cornell University. If there are any claims, if there is a desire to name someone who is spreading lies, well, here he is. This is Professor Dave Collum. This is Cornell University in the United States. You can check his diploma, his education, all issued in the United States, so any kind of claims or concerns should be applied there. We are allowed to quote. We do that openly and great precision and accuracy. So I'm therefore not ready to accept any claims on this particular matter. Now, a few more words on the Kiev regime. We see a lot of illustrations to its throwing fits of rage, but one of the most representative ones is the way and desire they are willing to destroy the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. On August 27th, the so-called State Service on Ethnic Policy and the Freedom of Conscience of Ukraine conducted the so-called expert opinions and have made a decision to recognize the Kiev metropolis of the canonic Ukrainian Orthodox Church to be affiliated with a foreign religious organization, being the Russian Orthodox Church, and the activities of the Russian Orthodox Church are banned in Ukraine. I have just one single question to this state agency of Ukraine, state agency on the freedom of conscience. I'm just wondering, what is the nationality of your God? What is the passport that the God has in Ukraine? I guess that would require a separate legal opinion. I'm sure they would succeed in determining that, and then they would be able to clearly state that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is affiliated with, and then move around this idea further. You may think that this is pure sarcasm, but this is exactly what Ukraine is doing right now, and they're doing that within the framework of the law adopted in 2024, and this is a law on protection of constitution in the area of operations of religious organizations. And the single purpose of this law is to eliminate Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And in its title, this very law declares protection of constitution. But I'm quite certain that the Ukrainian constitution guarantees freedom of religion. And here I would only quote Bulgakov, and they also tend to persecute Bulgakov in Ukraine. On September the 2nd, it became known to us that Ukrainian State Service on Ethnic Policy and the Freedom of Conscience, that's apparently a new cleansing authority, sued the idea of recognizing the Kiev metropolis as the managing center of Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Well, this state authority is truly acting as a new inquisition. This is religious cleansing that we're witnessing live in Ukraine right now. And they are aiming to deprive Orthodox Church of its property, and that was the property offered to that on rental terms. And that would apply to the absolute majority of churches and cathedrals. So this very State Service on Ethnic Policy and the Freedom of Conscience has already notified 154 religious organizations that are part of or are somehow related to the Kiev metropolis on the upcoming ban. Clearly, they are aiming to behead this largest religious confession in Ukraine. Kiev regime is determined to do that. And afterwards, it would only be a matter of time once they pursue the remaining parishes. But I'd like to raise a different question. We clearly see that once Kiev regime decided to fully eliminate the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, we see that the churches, the Orthodox churches, are now empty, and some call them breakaway priests. And there are people who keep watching how that kind of cleansing is happening to the church. And who are those people? They are openly applauding to the awful prosecution and torture of their brothers in religion. There may be some claims or disagreements on the ritual side of religion, but they cannot promote hatred, especially towards those people that they consider to be their brothers sharing the same parish. Obviously, the Orthodox Church are no longer visited by worshippers. They're getting empty, and we see that from the live footage in Ukraine. And once all those churches are taken away from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, what is there to be left? What is going to happen to those buildings, to those cathedrals? Well, I can tell you what is going to happen. They would do anything to those spaces. They can easily turn cathedrals into saunas or shopping malls, hotels, tourist centers. Have we experienced that in our history before? Yes, we have. In the latest history, in the 20th century, we've experienced that in the Russian history, and we believe that this is the part of history to be ashamed of. And surprisingly enough, this is exactly the part of our history that Kiev regime is claiming to combat, talking about decommunization and so on and so forth. But somehow they are doing exactly those acts that they are claiming to combat and fight against. Well, the only thing that the Kiev regime is actually doing is trying to eliminate and cancel all the good things that happened during that time. Those are monuments to the heroes of the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, the great writers who've been tested by time, beloved by everyone. They lived through the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the democratic times, and are still remembered and loved today. We live in the surprising times. Well, if you would think that this is sarcasm too, no. I will tell you this is the experience that I witness in many Western European countries and also in the United States of America. I worked in Manhattan, in New York, and I would regularly go through the western part of Manhattan, bypassing the cathedral that was turned into a nightclub. You would see dancing taking place with all the neon lights, with all the attributes of this kind of a nightlife. Nobody was surprised by that. Now it even hurts me to remember that. I do not know what is happening to this cathedral right now, whether that is still a nightclub, but it is definitely no longer used as a cathedral. But back then, I clearly remember that all the attributes of a typical nightclub are well represented in this very place that once used to be a cathedral. So you would go there and you would see everything that you're likely to see in a nightclub, including strip dancing. And the same could happen to former Orthodox churches in Ukraine. In the best case scenario, they could be turned and transferred into museums if they would resist the temptation not to embezzle this property and money, but at least turn them into a museum or in something that could serve educational or tourist purposes. Otherwise, that would be the most horrendous transformation of sacred religious places into shopping venues and facilities. And that would be exactly the opposite of what the Orthodox Christianity and Christianity as a whole is promoting as an absolute value. So that would be a grave offense to the millions of Orthodox Christians, and the Special Commission of the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine started its work starting from August 28th of this year, doing their work in the Kiev and Peter Lavra, the cave monastery, and they are doing so-called stock taking in the caves. What does that apply to? To all the sacred items and relics that are stored in the caves. And again, we can recall the history that was happening in Russia about 100 years ago in the Soviet Union, when all the relics, all the sacred remnants were disfigured and removed. And Zelensky and his regime claim that this is something that Ukraine wanted to step away from, to eliminate the past of communism. But this is exactly where Ukraine is heading to. It wasn't happening for the last decade, but now Ukraine is back there. On the 19th of August, the worshippers got to witness this so-called stock-taking process, and they would see the relics of their saints being taken away from cathedrals and churches, and would simply keep storing them in a regular warehouse somewhere in the basement. Well, it feels like something very similar just lately was happening in the Soviet times, and we seemed to express our sorrow that there was so much literature published on the matter, so many materials, so many conferences, so many roundtables, and we've been throwing ashes to our heads for so long. And this fact is truly, truly troubling and has already caused acute criticism from the public, from the broader Orthodox public. But this single fact is causing concern. But there are so many acts of the Kiev regime adjacent to that that include shelling of the civilian infrastructure, killing children, and humiliating the residents of the Kursk region, just like the Nazi Germans used to do that. Why then all other churches were keeping quiet on this matter? Is that politics? No, it's just the actual loss of all that is typical of a humanity. This is unhumanizing of Ukraine. And the so-called head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine visited the Lavrov caves and conducted a kind of attempt of a holy liturgy in an attempt to legitimize the completely illegitimate process of removal of all the sacred items from the Orthodox Church and the Lavrov. It's also noteworthy to say that the current museum and its head, Madame Kotlerovskaya, complained that once the caves in the Kiev Lavrov were closed, what do you think would be happening to those? They've noticed that the number of visitors to the Lavrov dropped dramatically. Well, I'm not surprised. I guess people are just afraid to go there. Just imagine that is the kind of vandalism that they are committing in the graveyard, in the cemetery. Who would go there to watch it? Nobody would. Only the investigating committee should go and take a look how they are opening up and dishonoring graves. And Svetlana Kotlerevskaya, who is now in charge of the Lavrov, the state official, shared her plans to allow more visitors once they push away all the monks from the monastery. And how exactly do they aim to do that? In the lower part of the Lavrov, they want to create all the necessary components of the infrastructure management. That's a direct quote, including some facilities where you can enjoy a cup of coffee, eat an ice cream and buy some souvenirs.
Oh my God. You see that this is sheer madness if you can offer this. And at the same time, we see that we have a great concern. So these people, they would like to make money on these holy graves. And can you imagine, she also offered to remove some frescoes from the Lavrov churches and to substitute them with more Ukrainian paintings. And according to her, this is all will be done as part of a de-Russification of the church. We have seen it already, and we have seen that in these churches and monastery facilities, some culinary shows are organized during the Lent season, and they make all that tasty food inappropriate for the Orthodox Lent. And what else can be said? Well, probably they should turn it into a hotel where all those remnants of the saints were kept. And you know, there are some fiction books where we could read about it, but really this is something about losing everything humane, and this is something from the Dostoevsky books, from Karamazov brothers and others. We are going to observe everything that is happening there in these areas, and we are going to investigate all the crimes against the Orthodox Church and all worshippers and priests. But what is most important, it is not the walls of those churches. And it is not only the people who are suffering. I am absolutely sure that real worshippers, real Orthodox worshippers, they will survive all that. But, you know, the blow is against the worship. And we see that the faith is distorted. And they are claiming that some quasi-empty faith is what they need. It is some religious similarity. And of course, the Foreign Affairs Ministry is going to collect all the data and all the cases of discrimination and freedom, limitations and restrictions. And we are going to do that with the international community. And we are going to do it because this will be the chronicles of our times. And this will be scrutinized by future generations. And they should know the truth, how all this was happening. And in future, we are going to publish detailed reports on human rights violation in Ukraine. And all these facts, they confirm that denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine is a must. And as the government of Russia stated many times, this is what we are going to do. Right, and speaking about the Bucha provocation, it was a staged massacre, a killing, and it was covered by all Western media. It is already 3 years since that time, and I hope you remember that at that time this unbelievable story was cooked, and we exposed the authors of this provocation many times. And we demonstrated that all those charges were falsified. And I remember by the minute how we were trying to understand what was happening, because it was so absurd, it was so wild and unimaginable, and really it was some parallel reality. But it was happening in the real world. And we were living through it, and none of the stated facts existed in reality. And we were reading the Western media, and we couldn't believe our eyes. We couldn't refute all that. And can you imagine if something like that was told about you in some media? So falsified lies published, and millions of people were reading it, and we couldn't even understand how we can explain. But what can you explain if you haven't done it? And in this case, you know, something different was needed. And if it was about you, then you would be a victim of these dangerous falsified lies. The Russian law enforcement agencies initiated an investigation in order to understand what really was happening. And, of course, the Zelensky's regime was not going to reveal their crimes. We addressed many times to the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, Volker Turk, and we requested to obtain additional data for this investigation. And in September of 2024, the Permanent Ministry of Russia in New York sent a report prepared by the investigative committee. In the Secretariat of the United Nations, they were trying to ignore this request and this report, and I know that some of the members of the Secretariat unofficially were addressing us, and they were saying off record, we do understand that all this hasn't happened, and the Kiev regime is providing false information. So they were saying, yes, we do understand it, and that is why there are no public announcements and comments on that. So at first, they did join the voices of the media, but later when they realized that it had been falsified, they just stopped commenting it, but they did nothing in order to reveal all these lies. And despite our numerous remindings, our request just stayed there somewhere on the shelf. So they were just pro forma letters we were receiving, and we didn't have any substantiated response. Only in July this year, so in September 2024, we sent that request, and in July this year, so it is approximately 1 year later, the permanent mission of Russia in New York received a response, although it was just a paper with no details, no arguments. And they were saying that the High Commission for Human Rights analyzed our request and took a decision that the corresponding data and information, and now what do you think? What is the ending of this phrase? That these data and information cannot be revealed. And why is that? And they explained because it would be a violation of the obligation to keep this information confidential for third parties, or otherwise it would cause some threat. And in this paradigm, we can think about, I don't know, some private data, personal information and all that. No, here they're speaking that it might cause a threat to the security of the United Nations activity. Can you imagine? The United Nations has the Security Council that is promoting security all over the world, and this response letter included, after we submitted our request, this letter explained that they cannot provide this information because it might put the security of the UN activities in danger. Well, of course, all this is nothing new, and such explanations were used by Volker Turk in the past in Geneva, and in this High Commissioner's letters he was referring to some structures like the Independent International Commission for Inquiry on Ukraine and others, and they were formulating it like the crime of the Russian military troops against Ukraine. And, when they are saying something against our country, then they provide all the reference links and some sources and lots of information. But in this case, they just indirectly refer to them, but they do not provide this information to us. So when we request for this information, they say, no, we cannot do it because it is not safe. And it seems that the Secretariat of the United Nations does this intentionally, so they do not cooperate with governmental bodies, and they do not ensure justice. And of course we are going to do something with it. And we sent to the Secretary General of the United Nations a letter, and we requested to explain why it takes so long to provide an answer. And we said that we do not understand this confidentiality agreement with third party, and we reminded about the UN obligations to work with nations for the purposes of justice. And we tried to publish this request as an official document of the General Assembly and the Security Council. So we would like to remind that we are not going to stop this work, and we will make sure that the United Nations specialists stop using such a non-constructive line of work. And we know that this Bucha provocation aimed at damaging the negotiation process. That was the main goal, and they were trying to demonize Russia, and for this they always find strength and resources, and this provocation was needed in order to explain to the world community why the Kiev regime is stepping out of the negotiations in the spring of 2022. And later it turned out that they had done that not because of these falsified aggressive attacks, but because Boris Johnson visited them and he promised them something, that the other states would help them. And it will be not only those Western states, but the whole universe. And after that, they stopped negotiating, and they needed some visuals for the Western media. So they needed this plot, this story, this narrative, and they followed this line of thought, and it was similar to provocations of the Nazi regime during the Second World War. And in the textual version of this briefing, we are going to provide all the details and all this information. And we insist that the investigation and inquiry should be held, and all the people behind it should be taken responsible. This is a real crime. And now, turning to Moldova, the parliamentary elections will take place on the 28th of September. And now we see that the intensive work is aiming not the preparation to these elections, but it is anti-Russia rhetoric. And on the 26th of August, we heard another portion of ungrounded and unjustified Russophobic statements, and they were saying that Russia is even holding some cyber attacks and bribes people in Moldova. And we are asking why Moldovan people, because they were saying that only Romanians are living there. And Sandu, the president of Moldova, is receiving money and bonuses from Western states. And the show believes that all this that Russia is allegedly doing is done in order to bring them to the side from the European democratic processes. And the Moldovan experts reminded the situation in the previous periods. And, you know, Moldova first joined Romania, and then, only then, they may join the European Union. But Bob Shoy didn't mention this. And the Moldovan experts reminded about that truth about the occupation in the periods of 1918, 1940, and 1941-44. And we also can remind this. Those were black days of the Moldovan history. And the Sandu's regime are now referring to it as the liberation of the territory, but it was mass terror and elimination of the population. And Bessarabia, that area, it was robbed and oppressed, and during 22 years of occupation, the death rate was at the top in Europe, and about 500,000 people left this territory, and almost 200,000 died of hunger. Lots of people were executed, and the Romanian historians, one of them is Nicolae Iorga, and I'm quoting, you're saying that even 10% of the population were not having appropriate feelings towards the Romanians. And this policy of terror and robbery, this is what was observed after the Second World War, and there were ethnic cleansing, and there were ghettos and concentration camps, and during 3 years of the Romanian occupation, almost 350,000 Jews were killed, and that was about 90% of this national population there. So we shouldn't forget this. We, a multi-nation country, we are supporting real values, and we are not going to refer only to some fragments of the history. All the facts have been registered, and we have heard so much about the Holocaust from the representatives of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they did so much to commemorate this memory. But the Holocaust is not just a word. This is people, and people who were executed and were killed. And now we see that this is the memory these Moldovan authorities are having. And those people, they were not only executing the population, but they also eliminating and damaging agriculture, production facilities. There was famine there. And now the experts are saying that Moldova is facing the most dangerous threat, and they are going to lose their institutional independence. And the Moldovan language is now renamed the Romanian language. This is like, science fiction, and no philosopher who is writing about some dystopias could imagine this. Now, these people are told that they are speaking a different language. Okay, so they are renaming the language the people have spoken all their lives. But this language does exist. And there's also the practice of appointing Romanian citizens, those who come from Romania, and we know that the government of Moldova is affiliated to Romania, and we see there are serious violations of human rights and international law, and peaceful demonstrations are violently dispersed. And we see that all the people they are grouped as those who are loyal to the regime and those who are not. And we know that for Russian or pro-Russian citizens, there will be only 2 voting units there. And of course, it is not enough for the full democratic process. And what about numbers? You can think, and I'm referring not just to you, journalists, because you cover this regularly. I'm speaking about the wider audience. People may say, okay, just 2 voting centers, all right, people may travel there, maybe they should get up early in the morning. Oh, well, not very convenient, but it is fine. Well, of course, yeah, it is possible to cope with it. And the citizens of Moldova, last time, I think they spent hours in those lines, but the problem is quite different. The problem is that in each of such centers, according to the Moldovan legislation, only 5,000 ballots are provided. So if 25,000 people are standing in the line, only 5,000 of them can vote. So it is not enough for the whole Russian population, or Moldovans who live now in Russia. So can you imagine that the Sandu government has no paper for publishing those ballots? Oh, no. So this is only problematic for Russia, because for Moldovans living in other countries, there's no problem like that. So there, the situation is quite opposite, and there will be more places where they can vote, and there will be even more ballots that is required. And those who are claiming that Russia is an alleged threat to Moldova, no, it is just the opposite. We have been always protecting, we have always been friendly with the Moldovan people, and they keep this in mind, they remember. Yeah. And there are plans to disseminate all this population and dissolve the Moldovan state. And now they have nothing in common. And right now, the European values, they should follow the European values, because otherwise they wouldn't be called part of Europe. And the experts say that there's no clear understanding what will be the outcome of the election in Moldova.
We paid attention to the annual report on military spendings of the NATO published by the UN Secretariat. According to the statistics, the Westerners steadily continue to militarize their economies and take all the possible measures to implement the agreements reached at the Hague summit on the comprehensive scheme to reflect respective expenditures, core 3.5% of GDP and related 1.5% of GDP. The Secretariat guarantees that all NATO countries, but Iceland, that doesn't have the military, will reach the 2% of GDP in terms of military spending. The document suggests that in 2025, the alliance members altogether will spend about $1.6 trillion for defense spending. This is much more than all other countries of the world put together. And this number keeps rising year by year. The U.S. alone planned to spend some $980 billion, and the rest, 600+ billion, for Europe and Canada. It's obvious that neo-colonialist ambition of the Western elites is something that underlines the irresponsible militarization of NATO. It is a major threat to the global security and also infringes upon the interests of the populations of the member countries. The ungrounded growth of military spending is achieved at the expense of socioeconomic interests, and the alliance has turned into an instrument of aggressive policy, and the NATO leadership is trying to ensure its domination at any cost, even to the detriment of the well-being of the citizens. And with the advent of the fall, the NATO camp demonstrates an aggravation in terms of the military activity near the Russian borders. And such developments are not only seasonal, but they require more detailed analysis against the backdrop of aggressive militarization in the EU countries. And this is also fed by feats of impotent anti-Russian hatred, together with a paranoid fear, something along the lines of the Russians are coming. And as is always the case, the Baltic states are trying to become the best performers, and they are trying to make full use of this good, so to speak, and we monitor closely the NAMIS 2024 military exercises held in Lithuania between September 2nd and October the 8th. As any other military activity of the NATO on the eastern flank, we see that the gradual number of the military participating in such exercises is growing, and currently it's about 15,000 service people. According to our estimates, this is a mistaken and destructive line of the North Atlantic Alliance. And they live according to the principle, if a fall is a pleasure, well, then it's a flight. You know, the NATO has no real reasons to bolster up its military infrastructure near our borders. The Kiev regime was saying for years that they were fighting Russia, and they did the same in the Baltic states, and they read what they publish in their papers, and they tend to believe it, but you got to get closer to reality. And naturally, NATO regularly gets into the pockets of their taxpayers, getting them ready to pull the belts. On many occasions, we mentioned that we have no intention to attack the NATO countries. The Russian president, the leadership mentioned this on many occasions, and that was a message presented in many of our interventions. However, the European leaders don't tend to notice this on purpose. They intimidate their citizens. They threaten them with imminent war with Russia. Now they have to be held responsible for their words because they are those who want that war. And I think they have to say that the militarization is something that they're doing with the same purpose. Well, unfortunately, we shouldn't hope that the line of thinking of the Western elites would change. We would continue to analyze the military activity of our neighbors, including the military exercises that bring up the risks of military escalation. We will take into account the threats to our national security when building our responses. To the Korean Peninsula, between 18th and 28th of August, in the south of the Korean Peninsula, the United States and the Republic of Korea held a joint military exercises, Ilji Freedom Shield 2025. Despite formal statements of the organizers of these gaming, it's impossible to call them defensive because several dozens of thousands of the service people and American F-15 jets and other offensive assets were present there. Now, the exercises were multilateral because the UK and the so-called UN command were part of the exercises. Such steps definitely are not aligned with the desire declared by the Washington and Seoul to diffuse the military and political tension. And in fact, they defeat the statements of U.S. and the Korean representatives on their desire to establish a dialogue with the DPRK and respect its form of government. How to establish a dialogue with those who are against such a development? That's absurd. Now, when we see that the sanctions and military pressure on Pyongyang are on the rise, it's impossible to speak of any prospects for turning the tide in this region, but rather about new provocation. Now, we've got a lot of questions on the eve of the briefing and prior to that on the situation with the Russian pensions to compatriots in Latvia and Estonia and how we settled the situation. We did mention that we did whatever we could to address the situation. We would share the information, and the time has come to do that. We will explain not only what we do, but we will tell about the outcomes. Thanks to persistent efforts on the part of the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Social Fund of Russia, we've settled the situation with the pension payments delays. Altogether, more than 15 million euros have been transferred to the respective authorities of Latvia and Estonia, and the money will come to the citizens' accounts very soon, between 8th and 14th September in Estonia, and between the 8th and 21st September in Latvia. We're talking about 13,000 of retirees, and I wanted to emphasize that the blame for this artificial crisis in 2025 the blame should be fully laid on the Western community and its financial institutions for the block the transfers from Gazprom Bank that is subject to politically motivated and illegitimate sanctions supported by the Baltic states authorities. And our compatriots are fully aware of this. And they were trying to persevere, they were waiting, they asked questions, but they did realize who created all those challenges for them. The Russian party, in bona fide and in full performs its commitments under the bilateral agreements with Latvia and Estonia on cooperation in social security and pension. The attempts to lay the blame on us, on the Russian Federation, have nothing to do with the real situation and are immoral. The Russian side has done everything in order to successfully resolve the situation, and our compatriots were held hostage. Thousands of our citizens were unable to receive Russian pensions for months. Oh, and the other important thing, I think you followed the hysteria in the Western media with respect to Madame von der Leyen aircraft. Allegedly, somebody jammed the GPS signal for a plane, and the pilot had to use paper maps to land. I want to emphasize this. I don't know what kind of to use the provisions of the Charter to the advantage, but, well, there are many components of the Charter that have to be followed and implemented in its entirety. This would serve as the true foundation for the restoration of the authority of the UN and the group of friends to protect the UN Charter leads the way in opposing Western messages and building fair polycentricity. Now let's move on to our next regular section on the crisis in Ukraine. I wish I could speak more about settling this situation, but there are some other trends too. Let's start with the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime. The Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to commit acts of terror against the peaceful population of our country. Last week, 110 Russian civilians were hit by enemy drones. 12 people died, 98 were wounded, including 3 minors. More than 2,500 munitions were shot at civilian targets. On the 29th of August, a drone wounded a civilian